The Evolving Leader is a series that shares insights into the never-ending journey of leadership and entrepreneurship. Join us as 3Pillar CEO David DeWolf talks with peers who have been instrumental in his own leadership journey. Thanks for joining us for episode 4 of The Evolving Leader. We're excited to welcome Jennifer Stanford to the studio today to share her thoughts on what the evolution of a leader entails and why it requires being committed to ongoing introspection and improvement. We'll also discuss the ever-evolving role of business leaders and entrepreneurs and why, as their companies mature, their leadership capabilities must do so to match. Jennifer works with a range of corporate leaders and companies to manage organizational change and communicate more effectively. She strives to help leaders develop a deeper understanding of beneath-the-surface traits and motivators that they must first understand about themselves before they can successfully lead others. Jennifer, thanks very much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
So thrilled to see you again.
So great to see you. Always fun when you can chat with friends about things that make you excited.
Totally.
Absolutely. So let me start by asking, you get to work with a lot of executives at fast-growing companies, including David and 3Pillar over the years. Why is it so vital in this day and age that leaders develop an ability to continually improve and adapt?
Well, I think if this year, I guess 2 years now, has told us anything, we're not in control of what's going on in the world. Mm-hmm. And I think as leaders, we should be hoping for change, right? We want change in our businesses, and especially for a global company like yours, David, and for a lot of companies nowadays, we have to be willing to learn and grow. We have to be, the term I've kind of coined lately is you have to be ready so you don't have to get ready. And so if we're not constantly looking to keep ourselves on that edge of what I would consider to be leadership greatness, we're not going to be prepared for the things that are thrown at us. We have different generations coming to the workplace since we've started. We have different cultures coming into the workplace. We have different dynamics going on in the world, and technology is continuing to change. And so if we're not ready to make those adjustments and investing in ourselves, then we're not going to be able to guide our companies, our communities, our families, quite frankly, to the places that they need to be. And so to me, there's still not a more important thing that leaders can do than take those investments to be their very best with their skill sets, because they really are setting the example.
Yeah. It's so fascinating because when you say that, what comes to mind is when you and I first met. One of the biggest takeaways I took from our ability to work together early on was the importance of not only self-awareness, but self-development and this concept of emotional intelligence and how much it plays into the leadership journey. I think way too many people think of leadership as charisma, as just personality. And there's a depth there behind it that you really taught me.
Absolutely. Well, and there's not a one size fits all. There's not this perfect map for what makes a leader, right? You have to be willing, especially from emotional intelligence. You brought that up. Thank you. My favorite topic. But the first level of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. And you would think that as human beings, we're pretty self-aware, but believe it or not, when you dig in and you start coaching with leaders, people have this perception or this impression of how they're supposed to behave because they're leading an organization, and they're not really willing to go deeper and say, hey, what's really going on? What are my triggers? How do I react? How could I react? And so I think people lose sight of how much control we have over the opportunity to make changes in our own behavior. Right. In our reactions and the direction that we're taking people in. And so if we're not willing to go deep, how can we expect other people to make those changes and adapt?
Right.
And
right.
That's why it was very fun coaching you, because you're like, let's dig in. Let's figure this out, And you're not going to figure it out one time and then it's done. Right? That's what's so great. And that's why I think, it's a relationship game. It's a relationship with yourself. It's a relationship with others, because you have to keep being willing to say, okay, how have I grown? How have I evolved?
Right.
And now what's the next thing, right? What's the next play for Alan's words, right? So just thinking about what is that going to look like for each of us.
And that foundation of self-awareness just gives you that building block to navigate that change, right? Because you're grounded in and of yourself, you know who you are, and then you're able to react in a very authentic way, right? I think that's one of the things. Emotional intelligence is not just about being that persona, right? It's about being your authentic self, showing up as your authentic self, and knowing those strengths and weaknesses so that you can complement them with other people and different practices.
Absolutely. And I think people get, where we get held up as humans is we kind of think about emotional intelligence and the levels of maturity within it, right? The self-awareness is the first piece. The second piece is the self-management. That's where we all get tripped up, right? We want to get to group management right away. We want to manage our teams and we want to build these relationships, but we get in our own way. And so, I know as an example, if, something's late, I might start getting anxious because I promised a customer something, right? I have to be able to check myself and understand what my trigger is, that I'm getting anxious, so that doesn't show to the rest of a team that perhaps has been working really hard to get a product ready, right? And have it ready, really ready, in terms of this is 100% ready to go. And so when we just think about what our reactions are, if we're unwilling to keep checking in, and we're willing to have those conversations with ourselves, and you said perspectives, which I think is an important word, we have to make sure that our intentions match the perceptions of others, right? You might be intending to be a fierce leader.
Yep.
Are you checking in to find out, is that the perspective that other people have of you, as an example? And so we have to match those up.
It's funny. One of the big things I learned from really this development of self-awareness is one of those perceptions I have. Probably one of my biggest weaknesses is that I'm an incredibly passionate person and my mind is always going. And so if you get me into a debate, and if we're working on something passionately that I care about, my IQ will go through the roof, and I will start to intellectually just grapple with things with you. But when my IQ goes up, my EQ goes down. And where I'm normally somebody that's very aware of those around me, in those intense debates that I'm passionate about, I can all of a sudden come across as scary or angry because my EQ goes down.
Sure.
And I don't feel angry. I don't mean to look scary, right? But it's just that natural persona coming out. The breakthrough of starting to realize that and understand it, and to be able to tell people that so they know what they're going through in that moment, is part of that management and that evolution of a leader. For me, it was so powerful to be able to say to people, oh my gosh, I just caught myself. I'm on the whiteboard. I'm going crazy. I just want you to know I'm not angry. I just love this. This is fun.
I'm not mad. I'm just excited.
That's right. Exactly. You've seen it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's, you have a very logical mind. You see the big picture. You try to fit the pieces together, right? That's an amazing characteristic to have, right? But it's that awareness that you're saying, hey, I'm aware that I do this. But, you said something else that I think is important is, as leaders, we want to make sure that our teams understand that, so that they have enough emotional intelligence that they recognize it. I've been in your organization long enough. We could say, hey, Mr. Green, let's tone it down a little bit, right? For that logical mind. And we immediately have a chuckle about it instead of it being a negative thing, because it's really not a negative. You're just over amplifying your personality trait that's strongest because you're excited. Right. And so, but you are right. It could cause us to lose sight of what's going on around me. How am I being perceived? Right. And can I make a quick pivot? And I think, again, when you're really strong in emotional intelligence, that's where you have that awareness and you're able to see yourself in the moment and make a pivot, because it's just too much for people to continue to say, oh, I'm sorry, that's just how I am. At some point, we have to take ownership of that, right? And we have to be accountable for our own actions. And we want to catch ourselves in those moments and pivot and make a change to the environment, so we're not having to go back later and apologize for our behavior.
So, Jen, you alluded to it, but let me ask you to talk a little bit more about the colors and how you deploy them. They were famous at 3-Pillar. I can still tell you who was what. You referenced David being a green. I'm high orange. But what's the basic concept of the colors?
Yeah, so it's an assessment that looks at how our brain functions, and so there are 4 ways, and each of us have, as you guys know, you've been through the training, but each of us have the 4 perspectives in our brain. And so there's the logical way, which is identify with the color green. There's relationship way, my primary way, which is blue. We have the action way, which is orange, and your second, right, which is brings that passion out. And then we have the organized way, which is the gold. And what happens in our brain is that the logical way and the relationship way typically are opposite ends of the spectrum in our brain, and the action way and the organized way are opposite ends. So as an example, you and I have always tempered each other very well because we actually are opposites. So we see that we can pull out the things, right, that need to come out in each other. But what we all share is all 3 of us have high action. As an example. So we could get each other fired up, and we can go, and we're willing, to go. And so understanding that about each other allows us to tap into the best of each other, but also be there and maybe pull some of those traits that are lower in each of us to make that stronger. And so having that identification in an organization, or when I'm working with clients, is so that they can better communicate and connect. It's not so much, let's lay down on the couch and let's talk about your personality and everything that's happened in the past. But it's, how do I know myself enough so that I can recognize it in others? And then again, how can I have that pivot so that I'm making better connections and that we're building trust quickly, which you have been so great about, having an authentic trust environment always, in all of your offices across the globe. That's been a major focus. And I think you can't get there if you're not willing to understand yourself and then take the time to understand others.
Yeah. One of the things I love about the colors that you just talked about is that it doesn't allow personality to become a weapon. So often, so many of these personality traits and schemes that we use, you're labeling people this or that. And the colors seem to kind of diffuse that and provide that vernacular without having to label somebody as a driver or this or that.
Well, and identity mapping is the recognition behind identity mapping in the 4 ways is that all of us have all 4 ways in our brain. We just only tap a couple of them. So you can't say, hey, you belong in this corner and you belong in this corner because you're so different. No, I actually have the capacity to understand the way you're thinking because it's inside my brain. I just have to dig a little deeper.
Right.
And it's when we do that and we make connections. If I am having a debate with David DeWolf, I know that I better have my facts ready to go because he's going to have his ready to go. So if we want to have a great conversation, I can't just say, oh, David, you're making me feel this way, because you're a thinker. And I need to be prepared to be on that same playing field with you. And then we're going to make progress. And that's, at the end of the day in business, that's what it's about. We're trying to make progress.
Right. Undoubtedly, for sure. I'm curious, you've referenced both self-awareness and self-management. Talk to us about the next 2 phases.
Sure. Group awareness, and then relationship management is the 4th. So until we can really manage our relationships at the highest level possible, where we're really high functioning, high trust, high accountability, again, we've had to pass through phases 1 and 2. That 3rd is recognizing your peers, your groups, your communities, your family units. And so being able to be in a group, we usually say in a group of 12 or more, all 4 ways are going to be represented. So if I'm facilitating a large group, if I'm in a boardroom, I know that I'm dealing with all of the traits, right? And so I have to adapt my style to pull out the best in all of those things. And so the more that we know about the people that we work with, the group dynamics that we're in, again, the easier we're able to maneuver. So many of us, as an example, I had mentioned that I'm high relationship. If I am only talking to people from a relationship perspective, let me tell you how people are feeling. Let me tell you how you're making me feel. I'm losing out on 75% of my audience because they're probably representing one of those other 3 of the 4 ways that I talked about. And so if we don't take the time to understand the group, how are we going to adapt in that group and build relationships? And to me, it's not about manipulation. You said that, which I'm happy. It's not about trying to manipulate groups to have them think our way. It's about how can we better support our groups because we're taking the time to understand them, what their needs are. And, human nature has this thing called reciprocation. And that means if I do something for you, you feel compelled to do something for me.
Right.
It's just natural human instinct. And so when we make that first leap and we try to connect with someone where their brain is, they're naturally going to want to do the same for us. And all of a sudden, we've created this environment where relationships are flourishing and people understand each other. And again, it takes the stress, not stress gone, because stress isn't bad, but it takes that connectivity stress, that collaboration stress away, because we now know how to operate together as a real unified group.
One of the core lessons of leadership for me throughout my 3-pillar journey has been just the continual reminder that leaders go first. You talked about just human nature and reciprocality. I have found that trust that you referenced that is existent throughout all our global offices really comes from, first and foremost, a level of vulnerability and authenticity. Being able to show up as who we are and to show that to one another, to be able to share opinions openly, to be able to debate, to disagree, to share hopes and dreams and fears and failures. And so often people think of leaders as the people that always have it right. And I think one of the really key things for a leader is to be able to go first in showing up as their authentic self.
I love that.
And with that vulnerability. You'd agree with that?
I 100% would. I think if you are not willing to be vulnerable, then you're still hiding behind something. And I think people mistake vulnerability with weakness, and I don't find that to be true. I think vulnerability matches authenticity, and it's not strength versus weakness, right? It's am I willing to show you? You're also creating an environment where people are feeling psychologically safe, right? Google did that study years ago about what was the most important thing for teams, and it was psychological safety, which means I have to be able to take a risk and know you have my back.
Right.
And you've really done a great job in creating that environment. I don't think, honestly, that you would have grown as much as you have if you did not have that opportunity for people to bring ideas
Right.
to a very strong leader
Yep.
and say, this is where I think we should be going. This is what I think we should be doing. If you immediately said, you're wrong, right? Or people were trying to express things from their perspective and you weren't willing to sit down and listen,
Yep.
growth stops. And that's going to happen across organizations. It happens across countries. It happens across families. And so, I get very passionate in this piece because I feel like if we are not offering ourselves up to people, how can we expect people to work for us
Yeah.
as leaders? I think it's an unfair ask if we're not willing to do the same.
I love that idea of creating an environment where others can come and challenge the leader. One of the fundamental questions that I always ask whenever I'm doing a final interview for an executive is, are you willing to coach me? Are you willing to challenge me? Because I find, we talked about this in an earlier episode, there is a lack of leadership today, an authentic, principled leadership in the world. And a lot of people have grown up in environments where they're not allowed to challenge.
Sure.
Right? Where they're expected to carry out orders, not actually help lead. And I think what's critical to an organization at scale is leaders create leaders. And great leaders will lead up, down, and over, not just down. And so I want high-performing leaders that are willing to come in and tell me I'm wrong, right? That's how we grow. That's how we get better. We all have to have that environment. True leadership isn't about authority and a hierarchy. It's about influence and helping to drive to the right answer for all of us.
Absolutely. And I think, I get asked often about the younger generations coming into the workplace. And you have a lot of young people in the workplace. And, it's not about, hey, on day 2, you should be challenging the CEO, right away. I don't think that's the messaging. I still think that you have to have enough emotional intelligence and data to know that there's a time and a place. I think there's a certain maturity that happens in an organization, but the environment has been set. And I think that's the powerful thing, is knowing that environment is there. So when you are ready and you do have an idea, right, or a challenge, you're able to do that, right? And I think of all the times in my own leadership journey, if I wasn't willing to hear what people were saying, hey, Jen, take a beat. If I wasn't willing to hear that, gosh, then how could I expect other people to even take me as a serious leader, especially a leadership coach?
Right.
We don't have it all figured out. I hope I don't. I mean, I still have half a life to live, right? I want to be figuring that all the time, right? I don't want to think that I've already reached this pinnacle of leadership success and we have it all figured out, because then I'm expecting nothing to change. And then where's the excitement in that?
Right.
So Jen, let me jump in and ask you about leadership. I feel like a phrase that we hear often is, so-and-so is a natural-born leader. In your experience, is there such a thing as a natural-born leader?
Gosh, that is a repeat question that I get quite a bit, I have to say. And my answer typically is no. I know that's usually what I say out of the chute, no. And then I caveat it a little bit. So I do think that there are traits that certain personalities may have. Certain people may have grown up being a little bit gregarious. They can get people to lead them. Perhaps you played high school sports and you were the one that got people excited on a team. You became a leader of that group without being pointed out. There are people that are very empathetic naturally, and so people flock to them. There's this flocking that makes people think that means leadership. But I always tell people that regardless of your ways, we talked about identity mapping in the 4 ways, we have all 4. And I really believe that leaders need that full perspective. You need to be logical. You need to be wise. You need to be strategic as a leader, right? You need to be empathetic. You need to understand your environments and how people feel about the environments that you're in. You have to be willing to understand that there is a plan that's going to get you there. You don't have to be the executor of the plan, but you have to have enough wherewithal to know that is a leadership trait that is important. And if you can't do it yourself, like that's not something I'm super at, you hire people that can, so that perspective is in the room. And lastly, you have to be able to get people fired up, right? You have to be action oriented. You have to be willing to take risks and take your organization in a direction. You have to have all 4 of those, and you have to be able to pull from those. That doesn't mean you operate in all 4 of those at all times, right? But there is nothing to say, because I really believe that emotional intelligence is a skill. And so I truly believe that as leaders, we continue to grow and develop in these areas, and someone is not just going to be born with all of this, right? If you're not willing to develop it, you're going to be a very temporary leader. I think that's different from a long-standing leader.
I think the other thing I would add to that is that too often we have this prototype of what it means to be a leader, and it is about charisma, or you use the word gregarious. I think there's different types and flavors of leadership, and everybody can lead. Leadership is about motivating, inspiring a group of people towards an outcome. And there's different ways to do that, and to honor that and respect that, and to actually value the different ways to do it. And I'll give you an example. You know John Bernardi, right? John was our CFO for several years in a growth phase where we really needed a leader to come in and to help us to really optimize the profitability of our business. Well, Heather, who you'll meet later in the season, was our sales and marketing leader at the time that we hired him, and originally didn't want to hire him because he didn't even have his headshot on the LinkedIn profile, right? It was like, what the heck? And he's very much a finance leader, right? And with that, he's not charismatic, not gregarious, but one of the most humble, kind, and authentic people I've ever met in my life. And he had a traumatic impact on the profitability of our business because he killed people with kindness.
Sure. I can remember being in rooms with him, and he always brought that voice that we needed to hear.
Yep.
Right? When we were going through something big, he brought a voice that we wouldn't hear if we were just going off of our own leadership capacity. Yep. Right? And so that's why I think it's not everybody is a leader. Everybody has the capacity to be a leader, and everybody has something to bring to the table, regardless of title.
That's right.
Right? And so, but it's do we set up a room so that we have all those perspectives, so that as a leadership team, or even as the person that has to make the final decision, you at least have gotten that perspective that you need to hear in order to move forward in the best direction.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah, John is great though.
So David, let me ask you a question about your growth and evolution as a leader. We talked with Bobby about how you have grown along with 3 Pillar. What do you see as the next kind of phase or next step in your evolution?
The next phase. Well, one of the staple lessons that I learned at the very beginning from Michael Deering, one of my very first mentors, one of my board members, was about the art of delegation, and how the hardest thing for an entrepreneur to do is to let go and to delegate. And with Bobby, we talked about how the same principles and lessons apply at each one of these phases, but you have to do them at the next level and the next level and the next level. And so one of the things that I'm focused on really right now, because we've just gone through a couple of inflection points that are really important, is making sure that I exercise those muscles yet again, and once again, let go of the things I should not be doing and empower and entrust people to do that, to get to the next level of scale, because I have to operate at the next level of abstraction. And that's really critical. And so really for me, it feels like right now that, and really focusing exclusively at what I'm uniquely qualified to do, what I'm great at. There's 3 things I spend my time on. Number 1 is team and culture development. 1/3 of my time goes to there. Number 2 is vision and strategy, seeing where we're going and making sure everybody knows this is how we're going to get there, and championing that. And then number 3, being in the market. And that means I need to get rid of the things that I'm not great at, which is I'm not a hardcore operator. You don't want me running a machine, right? I can design that machine. I've got great ideas on how to optimize it, but you don't want me running it, right? And so once again, getting out of the things that I'm not great at and doing it at the next level of scale is really what I'm working on right now.
I love that you used the word muscle. Talk about the word muscle, and it's very interesting, because when we think about our muscles and what we utilize, we tend to think of our physical body. We went for a run. I worked out 4 days this week. I need to have a rest day.
Yep.
Right. In order for us, if you're thinking about professional athletes as an example, to get to the next level, they have to enforce that rest day. They have to be willing to exercise those muscles and then rest those muscles. If founders and CEOs and top leaders are always on the go, if they don't take that time to delegate, like you said, and give their brain muscle a rest, they actually don't have enough capacity to have those big ideas and to see them through. And so I just love that you use that word muscle. And I would encourage people to just think about, are you giving your muscle a rest, in your brain? And so that from an emotional standpoint and from an intellectual standpoint, so that you can take it to the next level when the time is coming.
So true.
Well, I like the reference of 4 workout days and then a rest day. This is the 4th episode of the podcast. If anybody has binged the first 4 episodes and not just stopped to take a deep breath and have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or do whatever you do, Now would be a good time to do that. But Jennifer, thank you very much for joining us today. Great to have you with us talking about all things evolution and introspection and wherewithal and colors. As a blue, we look forward to breaking bread with you later today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Thanks for being here. This was so much fun.
Well, big thanks to Jennifer Stanford for joining us today, and thank you for joining us today. Tune in to the next episode of The Evolving Leader to hear what will be the first in a series of 5 lessons that all evolving leaders should take to heart. For episode 5, we'll be talking with Alan Stein Jr. about why getting the fundamentals right is a mandatory first step for any leader looking to take his or her game to the next level. Thanks again for tuning in to this episode of The Evolving Leader. If you liked what you heard, please give us a 5-star rating, a glowing review, and a share on whichever social media networks you call home. For more on the podcast and to view video of each episode, please visit daviddewolf.com/podcast.